Welcome to Out of the Game, episode 12. It is a small group yet again. This is Jeff Green, and I'm here with two of my compadres. One is Mr. Sean Elliott.
Hello, and to get this out of the way, for people who complain why we never have a full cast, we try, but we also have to decide whether or not we're going to do this thing once a month, or bi-weekly, or now you're getting 2 weeks in a row. So sometimes It's just difficult.
Right. It's either we do it with a reduced crew or we don't do it at all. And we have a third person here. Hey, Anguy, do you know that there's a panel at PAX with your name on it?
Yeah,
Are you aware of that?
I am aware of it, and it was both flattering and a little disconcerting. So I think to give people the full effect, I'm calling up the name of the panel because it kind of made it sound like I was deceased.
Right. It was kind of
Yes.
creepy when I saw it.
What was it? Spill the beans. What was this fucking panel called?
So this panel is called Post Enguy, Post EGM Video Game Journalism, or Where Do We Go Now? So I think for anyone who is familiar with the stuff that I used to do at the Level Up blog, there's kind of like 2 levels of Enguy-ness about that headline. First, it's kind of like a longish, convoluted headline, which I love to do when I was running my own blog. And then it has my name in it. Which I don't think I did a ton of, actually, if ever, on my own blog. But like post Enguy, post EGM video game journalism, or Where Do We Go Now? Yeah, that's
no offense to those running that panel or to you, but that's a really stupid-ass name, don't you think? Post Enguy, post EGM. I don't know. Did that turn a page in the world of video game journalism? I mean, not to undermine your own, influence and credibility and everything, but
I don't think so. I mean, there are a lot of. I mean, there was a real flowering, I thought, of game journalism in the last, 4 or 5 years. I mean, podcasting, I think, was a big part of the change with the stuff that you guys were doing on the Brodeo and, One Up Yours, now Listen Up, the rise of blogs, the plethora of people getting into game journalism, and just a lot of the amateurs, people who were writing about it for free and not sort of bound in the traditional preview-review cycle.
Also, it bothers me that it's post-Enguy, not post-Kroll. It's a little personal, don't you think? Like if it said post-Jeff, post-EGM video game journalism. Unless you're kind of like Cher now, you're just Enguy.
Well, I mean, this is something that I think we've maybe slightly addressed in previous shows, but I mean, were you surprised at the outpouring when either of you guys left Ziff, or were you sort of expecting it, given the outpouring for the people who had left previous to you?
No, it was surprising. It was. I mean, and flattering, obviously. You don't really have any. You have some awareness of the effect you're having or the influence you're having, but not really. I mean, mostly you're in a bubble doing your job and just trying not to suck on a daily basis, right? I mean, it's only when things happen like that, like you leave or something, that then there's that kind of outpouring for you.
And that's the thing, I think, with this is just sort of, like you said, that idea of influencing people. So I was just trying to put out the best blog I possibly could. And I definitely want to be read, and I definitely want to have an impact. But the number of people who sent me emails afterwards saying that they were inspired by me, and these were people I considered peers, as well as readers, it was shocking and flattering and gratifying at the same time. But like you said, you're so busy just trying to do the best thing that you can do on a deadline, on a day-to-day basis, that it's just hard to think about it in those terms. And so when I saw that, I was just kind of like, ugh. And then I was kind of flattered, and then I was like, ugh. And then I was flattered, and it just sort of goes back and forth. But
it's definitely flattering. I mean, there's no question. I mean, you said it at the beginning there that the post-Enguy made it just sound like you're dead. That's what bothered me the most, I think. So,
well, and you guys
anyway,
have your own.
I'm gonna sneak out from my EA booth duties to attend that session. By the way, It's at 11:30 a.m. on the Friday of PAX, and it's going to have Chris Kohler and Patrick Klepek and Karen Chu from One Up and Gus Mastrapa from The Onion on the panel, and I think that'll be fun to listen to.
And it's a formidable group of people, in their own right. So, I mean, the idea that somehow, game journalism, is post anything because, any of us left, I think is kind of a strange proposition. Obviously, individual voices have gone away to a certain extent, but
Right.
there are plenty of people
Well, I'm
who
going
are.
to totally be in the audience heckling all those guys. Now that I'm an aspiring young game developer like James Milkey, I'm going to be out there just sort of yelling at them all that they're wannabe developers, and they don't know shit.
Well, and Sean, you guys have your own a panel of your own that I think listeners of the podcast should be pretty excited about, right?
But sorry, I'm coming back. You mean the GFW reunion?
Yeah, the Brodeo is back.
Yeah, and I do want to I just no offense to anyone, but I feel like personally that the whole topic is just so played out. I mean, not played out, but I mean in particular we've covered it before, so that's why I've kind of just been quiet. And I think for all we've both had to defend against accusations that we've crawled up our own ass, and that sometimes when game journalism becomes too self-reflective, it can be a problem. All that largely had to do with the symposium that we started but never finished. But so I do one thing. It's even though it's part of a tradition for GFW Radio to talk about the industry itself. I mean, to talk about writing about games. I do want to steer away from that. And what we're going to do
here now or at the reunion?
I'm talking about at the when we host the thing.
Okay.
At PAX. Are you nervous about it?
About the reunion?
Yeah.
Nah, I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm not nervous at all. I'm looking forward to seeing all you guys and talking again, and I think it'll be like riding a bike kind of thing.
I think so. I mean, we're both very used to in the jobs we do standing up in front of large groups of people. And speaking to them. But for some reason, the idea that just going there and that you're going to see all these faces and knowing that, I don't know, it's not just business, that they must have liked the things that you've done enough to want to come and listen to you again. I don't know. I don't think I'll get stage fright, but it'll be. I think there will be a few minutes where the first few minutes are going to be rocky, especially Ryan. I'm really curious to see what happens with Ryan.
Right, because Ryan's, he's come into his own a lot on Geekbox, and he's a much more loud presence than we ever let him be on GFW Radio. So it'll be funny to see how he adapts back with us again. And yeah, I mean there could be some awkwardness. I mean, it's not the same as if we had been recording and had our podcasting chops up every single week with the four of us and then went to PAX. We're going to be a little rusty. But I just the fact that we get to do this at all, I think is just really, it's just kind of neat. It's kind of a pleasure. I mean, we both have all four of us have our own different jobs now, and they're, varying degrees of cool and hard and sucky and great. And but this is going to, at least for me, it's like taking us back to a really ideal time. I mean, it was really just, you don't get that kind of experience in many jobs, if ever.
Yeah, definitely.
Where you get a group of people who are pretty much all on the same page and working towards a common goal and being into it, so.
Are you guys ready? I was just explaining to someone who has no familiarity with the industry at all the other day about how bizarre PAX is going to be, because you're suddenly in a place where people recognize you. And, I've heard tell that a few people, we have to thank Tom Kim again when we're there, but he's had someone else, because he's not attending, he had someone else take what's supposed to be a big box of Korean treats for us. But that's just so bizarre, especially now that I'm like really not used to it. It'd be like, huh.
I was given about, not exaggerating, about 10 pounds of Dutch candy when I was at Gamescom last week in Germany. A guy came in. The Dutch Slayer is his Twitter name.
The Dutch oven.
Yeah, and he loaded me down with all this candy. I don't. It's
Did you
supposed to be
specify
for the
that that's for Robert Ashley? Because we know Robert likes to, you know, get high.
the the Dutch candy. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not that kind of Dutch candy. In fact, that's probably where Robert is now again. Um,
Most
a
definitely is.
little
So did
wake
you?
and
Are you
bake
going to bring
for
it to
Ashley.
share?
Well, I'm gonna try. It's heavy. There's a lot of it.
It's its own
If not,
carry-on.
well, I'll try. Yeah, that's the best I could say at this point. But it was funny. I mean, he brought it to me. I was behind closed doors at Gamescom, in the EA area, so I was just with other EA employees when this guy comes in with this humongous bag of candy for me, and these people don't know me from that life, so they were just like, "What the fuck, Jeff?" And yeah, so that that part of it, that recognition is, I'm sure we'll get it at PAX somewhat, and I got it over in Germany, which I wasn't really expecting, and it's always flattering, but definitely surreal.
You know, they closed down maybe I think a week before you ended up in Germany. They closed down the all you can fuck buffets.
The who?
God.
All you can fuck buffets. Seriously, Robert posted that story on his Twitter. They just had a few establishments there where you pay a cover fee, and then you're guaranteed all the sex that you can handle with as many of the women there as you want until you've had your fill, and then
God.
So that's like about 7 minutes for most guys.
7 minutes of bliss.
Wait, where is this? This is in Germany?
Yeah.
Huh.
You know, they have, like, when you're there, whenever you're in German hotels, it's kind of, I mean, have got to be tired of hearing this because it's like, oh, you've never been abroad, but you'll just be sitting there watching maybe, a football game or something, and all of a sudden there's some naked grandmother, and then all of a sudden you hear, like, Hausfrau, and then, like, the guy's just reading off the numbers, like, Sechs und Sechs und Sechs und Sechs, and, and then all of a
Well, I
sudden,
actually,
next thing you know, it's back to, like, you know.
I never turned on the TV the entire week in Germany, but I can say that when we go to France, which is quite often because of my wife being French, that I always enjoy watching just regular old mainstream TV because the commercials will often have nudity in them, and it's so funny because it's like it's the kind of commercials that we have here, except where we're all just sort of like in America, it's all just like teasing. It's like the commercials I'm thinking of specifically are like the shower soap commercials, where the camera just goes lingeringly down the body, but then strategically cuts away.
Yeah.
In France, they just like do it, and you're just like,
show it.
whoa, okay.
And they had
I'll
that
buy
one
that
ad.
soap.
I guess it wasn't as successful. It was successful in that I remember the ad, but I don't remember what it was selling. But it was basically like a C-47 loaded up with women with breast implants, and then proceeding to skydive from the thing.
I remember that. I do remember that. Yeah. So no, I didn't see any porn in Germany. However, when I was a young man in my 20s, I went to Hamburg as part of I did a like backpack around Europe thing, and ended up in that city. Which, if you know anything about it, you don't really need me to go on. That's where the Reeperbahn is, which is a notorious red light district. And I can honestly say I didn't actually spend any money or do anything untoward, which is kind of stupid now in retrospect. But now that I'm an old married guy. But I did see some amazing things, I have to say, because I was wandering around with a couple youth hostel dudes I had just met, and we ran into, of all things, a couple American sailors who just said, "You guys should come with us. We'll show you a couple things." So, and yeah,
So
they
did you
did.
go?
I did go, yeah. But again, it was sort of like basically what it was like a supermarket or warehouse of naked girls for your, for your buying pleasure, which fortunately I was smart enough not to do.
What specifically do you mean? You mean literally it was this giant thing with shelves with women standing on them in lines, all
You know what? It wasn't
faced
that
up
far
like
from
Campbell's soup?
it wasn't that far from that. What it was we went down these stairs, and it was basically like a subterranean garage. Like, picture the any parking garage, and there were girls in there. The lighting was very dim, and if they were wearing anything, they were wearing like glow sticks around their waist so you could sort of see something. And they were just there to offer themselves to you. If you said yes, they would then take you up into whatever room that was above that garage. Yeah.
That's a rough life, Jeff. And your daughter, when she listens to this, is going to be very disappointed in you.
I walked out of there without having spent a dime.
They're never going to believe you. You're even worse. You loitered in a sex supermarket.
I did. And in fact, once they realized I was loitering, or me and the other youth hostel guys, they booted us the hell out of there.
Really?
You know? Yeah, there was no window shopping. It was only for serious customers. We were just kind of like, wow, it's a bunch of naked girls. You know? That didn't really go over too well.
Well, Guy, what about what are your experiences with prostitution? What? It's a serious question, dude. I want to know. This is an all-inclusive discussion.
Wow. When I woke up this morning, I did not know we were doing... I didn't realize we were going to be working blue. I didn't know it was going to be that kind of podcast. Wow.
Yeah.
Well...
I'm trying to think if I have any. I really don't have any other than just, going around public parks and stuff and seeing naked people playing Frisbee and things like that, or like just
That's not
for the usual.
prostitution.
It's not. I would say it's not really much. Like I was with a girlfriend at the time, and it's not really much different than if you're at a beach with someone. You're trying to control your eyes from where you look, but it was just a little more tempting to look. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever, other than the commercials on German TV and the usual going to Vegas when all the people are on the street like slapping the cards in their hands and sticking them out at you, like pregnant women walk by with another child they already had in a stroller, and they're like the dudes on the side of the street are handing them flyers for, I don't know, pissing and strangulation and stuff.
I don't know, the Vegas, I find the people on the street in Vegas handing out those cards, I for some reason I find them very creepy. And it's not like it's just something about it. It's just seedy.
Well, it's more just sad because usually when I go, it's a bunch of Latinos, and sometimes it's older women, and it's just work, It's just what's the cheapest labor you can get to do this, and it's kind of seems like a demeaning job, but they're just trying to make some money, and it's just a waste.
I actually never understood how that particular job worked, frankly. I mean, couldn't they just take them all and like dump them into a wastebasket and said they handed them out?
You'd think so, but did you watch The Wire? What did they do when Randy was passing out the political flyers?
Oh shit! Yeah, what did they do?
How'd they keep Randy honest?
I don't remember. Is this a quiz? Because I don't remember.
I don't remember either. I just wanted to say The Wire.
Maybe a little spoiler alert there for people who haven't watched The Wire yet, though.
Boy, I flew back from Gamescom in I got I'm on an amazing roll with British Airways. I got a third business class upgrade in a row. But anyway, they had TVs there where you could just watch a whole bunch of different crap, and they had 3 episodes of The Wire from season 3 on there, just random episodes, and I forgot just how freaking great that show is. I mean, it is so good. If you're listening to this and you've heard us talk about The Wire all these years and you still haven't watched it, just turn this fucking podcast off now and go rent The Wire, because it is such good TV.
I'm now running into this thing where I work at 2K Boston, where there are very few people there that have watched it, and there's a number of people, and you always try to get the story straight, and you're like, I didn't like it, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? What's wrong with you? What did you see? And it always seems as though they've seen a few episodes from the first season out of order, and they came to it with all these assumptions about what it's about, and so they're complaining that the dialogue seems contrived, or all these other things, or that's, again with the assumptions that it's just another cop drama. And
well, first of all, you can't watch these things. That's like reading a book out of order.
Exactly, and also just to even get a sense for what the series does and what its scope is. I mean, I'm not saying you have to, watch the entire thing to appreciate it, but I just tell that if you can go through the first season and still feel the way that you're saying you feel right now, then like that's cool. I won't argue anymore, but.
Well, a lot of people...
I guess there's a topic. What are things in your life like that where you just can't stop proselytizing for it because you're convinced that it's, that it's nothing but good. But for whatever reason, you just can't convince people to give it a shot, or when they do give it a shot, they want to judge it maybe a little too hastily and write it off.
The Wire's definitely. I mean, the Wire takes commitment. It's not an easy watch. You have to. They made you work for it all the time, and rewatching it more than once, you start to see things that you didn't even get the first couple times. It's so rich that way, and they just clearly aren't there to just kind of mollify you and give you a little video pacifier to sit in front of the TV. It's work, and not everybody wants that, and that's cool. That's understandable. The one that I could never be persuaded to watch, and that now I've been tweeting about it a lot, is Buffy. I could never get my head around that one. And now I'm completely on the bus, and I'm doing the same thing I was to people who were like me. Like, you have to watch this show because it's so brilliant. I'm amazed actually how good it is. I knew I would like it, and I didn't actually realize it was as good as it has turned out to be.
That's one where I'm guilty as charged. I need to get around to watching it. I've seen a few episodes.
Yeah.
I liked what I saw, but...
Yeah, well, we're not talking The Wire depth, but again, the build-up definitely helps. You need to watch them.
It seemed to have... The episodes I saw seemed to have something of Star Trek about it, where, classical Star Trek, like Next Generation... They'll just take some ethical issue or something, and they'll use the episode as a way of basically exploring, some issue from Bentham or from Hume or whatever.
Well, some of it is certainly that.
In a total pop culture and entertaining way.
Right. Some of it is that. I mean, definitely, you could see like, here's clearly a metaphor for drug abuse or whatever, or maybe just a metaphor for high school in general. But there's other episodes where they're clearly just either playing it for laughs or, it's just Joss Whedon showing off his considerable writing and comedy chops. I wouldn't put it at the same level of The Wire, but I do think that the best episodes, there's an episode called The Body, which actually I was talking with my wife about it, and we both agreed that it's probably the best 1 hour of television that we've ever seen, or certainly I've ever seen, about death, about actual death, and the process that people go through when someone that they love has died. I was totally not expecting it at all, especially on a show called Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right.
But it was just a beautiful episode. And yeah, I mean, I've read books on death, and I've experienced, loved ones dying, and nothing to me has come closer to sort of capturing that feeling that you immediately get right when somebody dies. So even if you don't watch you can't get around to watching the whole 7 seasons or whatever, that particular episode is brilliant.
I think that's one of the things that's daunting about, getting into new shows late, is just sort of, what are you committing to? So something like 7 seasons, that's going to seem really daunting to people, or 5 seasons, or even 3 seasons. I mean, the show I would give an example of that some people I was able to convince, a lot I wasn't, was Deadwood. For me, I came late to all of the signature HBO shows. I started watching The Wire during season 3. I mean, it didn't start at season 3, but I started watching it while season 3 was airing. Sopranos, I think, was 2 seasons in before I started watching, and Deadwood was maybe a season in by that point. I think I watched it on Oz. Oz was starting to wind down. I think there were maybe 2 seasons remaining on TV. Oz is another one that is, I wouldn't put it quite on the same level as the Holy Trinity. I think on the show I've talked before about the 3 Davids. David Chase with The Sopranos, David Simon with The Wire, and David Milch with Deadwood. I mean, for my money, those are the 3 best TV series ever. But the thing that was great about Oz was they didn't have the psychological acuity of The Wire. I mean of The Sopranos, and they didn't have like quite the sociological acuity of The Wire. But what they did have was that they were willing to sort of go more theatrical, bolder, take more chances, go with some sort of wilder storylines, and just men in prison, and that kind of, I don't know, man. That first season, the first episode was tough to watch. When Beecher ends up in prison, he's there because he killed someone when he was driving drunk. And we all know, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't watched, even though the statute of limitations has definitely expired. But I mean, what happens to him in that by the end of that episode? I mean, it's the typical prison nightmare. It's sort of the whole stereotypical reason about why you don't go to prison, but it's also that whole relationship between him and his captor abuser and the evolution of that. I mean, it's just nuts. And the acting was so good.
Yeah. I mean, and the whole evolution of his character, I mean, he is the everyman, right? He's us if we fucked up and ended up in prison. But what happens to him over the course, and right, that relationship with Schillinger.
Yep.
Who's the actor who plays Schillinger? What's that guy's name?
J.K. Simmons. It's J. Jonah Jameson.
As someone who hasn't heard the series and just listening to the discussion you're having, I think,
yeah,
like N guy said, the statute of limitations has passed, and I think you should, just be pretty explicit about it. I think it would only help the case, your argument that it's worth watching.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is that the whole thing is so Oz. It's an experimental prison unit inside of a New Jersey prison, and the whole thing is sort of a play on the idea of the panopticon. So there are plexiglass doors to the cells, so that they can be watched from kind of like a single prison guard station. So the idea of the panopticon is that it reforms people because they always know they're being watched, so they have to behave. And within this, you've got your, if anyone's been following the news in California, where you've got, race riots in the prisons and things like that, you have a lot of racial stratification and segregation inside the prisons. You've got and even within certain groups, so among the black inmates, you have, the kind of the gangsters, and then you have the black Muslims, and then you have the white ethnic gang. So you have this kind of Irish group, and then you've got these Italians, Italian gangs and stuff like that. So you've got all of these sort of forces jockeying in the prison, and then you've got the people who are running, the guards and the warden and all those kinds of things that are going on. But what happens in the first episode is Tobias Beecher, who, as I was saying, is there because he killed someone, he hit someone while he was driving drunk, and ends up in prison. And by the end of the first episode, Schillinger, who's from this white supremacist gang, basically has raped him and used a pen to tattoo a swastika on his ass.
And it's clearly the beginning of, he's basically said, "You're my bitch now," and actually Beecher has gone to Schillinger to get away from some other inmates who were threatening him. So
out of the frying pan into the fire.
Right. That's the beginning of Tobias Beecher's Odyssey. There's certainly a lot of intellectualizing you can do about that show, but also, let's not forget that this is essentially like soap opera for dudes, I mean, that was a lot of the appeal, was that, and I say for dudes because for some reason, more than any other HBO show, I found that a lot of women just did not want to watch Oz, but that guys were gripped by it. For whatever reason, and there were multiple storylines running out through all the seasons that were essentially.
It's an entirely womenless world, and it's all about male social hierarchies, right?
Yeah, that's right. Male social hierarchies, male power trips.
So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I can see not every, I'm not going to say that there's not a woman who would enjoy that, but that just along stereotypical lines, it's.
Right.
Well, look,
another great thing about this. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that it definitely wasn't Sex in the City, but at the same time, there were a number of women characters. You had the nun who was one of the spiritual advisors. You had the doctor. Who, so as long as we're in spoiler alert territory, one of the Irish gangsters ends up falling in love with her, and she doesn't want anything to do with him, so he ends up having her boyfriend or husband like attacked and killed on the outside world, and he hires doesn't he get his brother to do it?
Yeah.
And then his brother ends up getting brain damaged when the cops come for him, and his brother ends up in jail. You know, so when he said soap opera for guys, I mean, it's like you do have those kinds of, they do go with those sort of outlandish plot lines.
Are there any foofies?
Foofies?
Foofies? Yeah, do they explore foofies?
What are foofies?
Foofies, like when you, I think what it is you put
Neither of us want to know.
a latex glove around your penis and then you wrap that in a towel and then you just hump it. It's a foofy.
Well, there's a lot of like men on men sex, if that's what you're asking.
So I guess there's no need for foofies because they're just taking what they need.
Right. The show does not shy away from that aspect of it at all.
But it's not gratuitous to the point where they're showing like abused buttholes that look like clusters of champagne grapes.
No, Sean, that's your own show.
You couldn't even say that with a straight face, man. You couldn't even say it with a straight.
Don't project. I mean, it runs the gamut of like horrific rape to guys falling in love.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you had that. Oh, that was another thing in season 2. So basically, all right. So I mean, just warning to anyone. I mean, you really should just watch the show because we're going to go seriously into spoiler territory. But as we've said, the statute of limitations has expired. So anyway, at the end of season 1, after enduring both tenderness and a fair amount of abuse from Schillinger, Beecher finally loses it, goes nuts on him, knocks him the fuck out, and then proceeds to drop a deuce on him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
And so now they're of course mortal enemies because kind of when you do that to your man, I guess in the prison world that doesn't go over very well. So now they're mortal enemies.
That was one of the great TV payoffs too, because you have this guy being abused and tortured basically by this insane asshole Nazi prison guy, and Beecher, who's this mild-mannered white-collar dude who screws up by driving drunk and ends up in this nightmare situation. He takes it all season long, and when he finally loses it, he really loses it. And it's one of those like, yeah, moments in front of the TV. Like you're saying, that's just kind of the start of it for him. I mean, that just makes things 10 times worse for him. So.
And so in season 2, you have a character that comes into the prison who Schillinger knows from the outside world, and basically Schillinger gets this guy to seduce Beecher and break his heart by basically get him to fall in love with him and then leave him. But then, which he does, and of course, Beecher is he falls apart as a result of it. But then the guy realizes he was actually in love with Beecher. But now, of course,
it sounds like One Life to Live, dude. As you describe all this.
I mean,
I think he was cheating on him, and the husband came home, and she was with the pool guy.
Well, look, I don't know that we're doing a good job of convincing Sean or any of our listeners.
I think the quick hits are cool. All I had in mind was that we run through pretty short order some of the things, like whatever it is, our favorite things that we might have trouble convincing someone. And I think people got a lot to chew on. They've got people shitting on one another and abusive Stockholm Syndrome romance, and so they.
Right, and another thing is that this was like the factory where, as Ngai said at the beginning, that the David Simon and the homicide this whole clique of actors and writers and directors um, were involved, and so there's basically like one actor after another that you've since seen on a ton of other shows who are on Oz. So,
And
in
one of
fact,
the
Lost became a repository of Oz characters for some weird reason.
Absolutely, and so that's one of the key ones. One of the key storylines is one of the you had an African, and I say African, not African American, an African inmate named Simon Adebisi, who sort of ends up becoming instrumental in helping instigate a riot in the prison that has a number of consequences. But basically, he became one of the signature characters in the show, just for sort of his, because there's a lot of like Machiavellian plotting that you have going on in the show with characters like Schillinger plotting, Beecher starts plotting, so I think that's what it is like the amount of intrigue that's going on in the prison. And then you had the ticks of the show. So you had a character played by, I forget his name, but the guy with the dreads from the second and third Matrix movies. He was their operator in the second and third Matrix movies. He plays a character who was paralyzed as a result of a fall. He was running from cops on a rooftop, and I can't remember if I think they shot him and he fell over, but anyway, he's paralyzed from the waist down. He's in a wheelchair in the prison, and he would have these stylized spoken word style monologues that would, help basically state the themes from that particular episode. And then the other thing is, like, whenever a new prisoner was introduced to Oz, you would see the crime that they committed on the outside world that had them end up in Oz. So all of those things combined just created this, really compelling, the people are in this crucible of crime and punishment, and inside there are these issues. They're still being raised and still active. Crimes are still being committed. To what extent are the guards themselves getting involved in some of this stuff? And it just for the first 4 or 5 seasons, I mean, it was really, really strong. There was nothing else like it on TV.
Last word on that show. Did they do anything interesting with the point of view? Like, where is it just sort of a typical camera work where it's just the disembodied camera moving around, or do they attach things to people's perspective? Is it an omniscient point of view? Is it limited omniscience? And the reason I'm asking that is the obvious thing would be that the Panopticon theme works because the viewer is basically situated in the center of all of this, watching it, and then doing the anthropological work and seeing how the dominance hierarchy works and all that.
I don't think the camera work. I mean, it might have had like a light sort of cinema verite look to it, but I don't think they did anything super special with the camera. The monologues were definitely shot in very stylized ways. Usually against a complete black backdrop, and very flashy camera work, lots of quick cuts and other things, unique angles. But the day-to-day of the show, the stuff that was sort of outside of that stylized reality, was just pretty straightforward and straight ahead. Deadwood, I think, had a bit of a different issue for people who might have resisted it, because with Deadwood, it was sort of, it's a Wild West, so not everyone's interested in that. And even for people who are, it wasn't your traditional Western with like sweeping vistas and chases on horseback and any of those things. I mean, it was like a grimy, you could almost smell that town. And this is clearly a time where people were not bathing every day. So it was definitely gritty and dirty and grimy. And then also the profanity, which was, David Milch's sort of American Shakespeare, where you have these actors like Ian McShane delivering these phenomenal, profane monologues and exchanges that were just super powerful. And what that show was about was, to me, because you had the lawman, the sheriff on one side, who's played by Timothy Olyphant, and then you have Swearingen, who runs the town brothel on the other, and is a pretty unscrupulous guy involved in like murder and and these kinds of things. But they basically represent the idea that the show seems to be advancing, is that it's about how do you create a civil society out of nothing. That this town where there was once nothing and has now built itself up into something, and is trying to figure out, which sort of state and government it's going to ally itself with, and it's sort of advancing this notion that you need both these forces of law and criminality in order to create a civil society. And that clearly wasn't for everyone, but I was riveted for the 3 seasons it was on the air.
You might like. It sounds like something that I would enjoy because just the whole notion of how, given not a total void, but given a void of established authority in government, what ends up happening? What different courses are there for people to organize themselves? What different options are there for people to organize themselves under, and how does it work? I read a work of fiction not so long ago. I might have talked about it on the show. It's called World Made by Hand, and it basically supposes that either via some kind of disastrous epidemic and as well as some military and political issues, America just falls apart. And it follows a group of communities in New York area and what they end up doing, and the role that religion plays in some communities, and just banditry in others, and how it all ends up coming together. And it's kind of a neat counterpoint to, like, say, something like The Road, which is just uniformly bleak and entirely hopeless. And this manages to make a whole lot. You're constantly going back and forth between, God, this wouldn't be such a bad situation, to like, oh my God, this is horrible, what's going to happen? But yeah, I think you might enjoy that.
Did you watch any Deadwood, Jeff?
Yeah, I did. I watched about a season and a half of Deadwood, and I didn't stop out of it wasn't a quality thing. It was actually, I think, just like my HBO ran out. So it's sitting there on my Netflix queue to finish. But I did totally love it when it was on. That one, for sure, Ngai had the problem of being a Western. Like that was one that I couldn't get my wife. She couldn't get a handle on that one at all, just because of the setting. So I think that's just going to be an immediate turnoff for some people who just see horses and guys in hats and they immediately tune out. So.
Well, what's interesting is like when people put themselves in a position like where they almost kind of have to give it a shot. So what happened was my mom, I still don't know how exactly it happened. I must have just raved about the show. And so I'd gotten my mom into 24. She loved 24. And then...
I just got to interject and say that show fucking sucks. Sorry.
Yeah, it has its moments in its heyday.
Sorry. It was like, I watched the first 3 or 4 episodes, and it was like a fucking horrible after-school special about the perils of drug use.
Wait, which
mixed in with... Well, it was like the dude's
season?
daughter... I think it was the very first season. The dude's daughter is partying with the wrong friends, and that's part of the morality tale. And then the next thing happens, they end up with some shady dudes, and it's not just that the dudes are supplying them with drugs. Then they abduct them, and then they take them all around town, and it was like almost Tromaville level of shit, where they like it looks like they're gonna escape, and then they get hit by a car, and one of them's got a broken leg, and I just couldn't believe the fucking melodrama. And then, not to mention that you have like whatever he was. Is he FBI? Like, what is?
No, dude, he's CTU, man.
CTU, man.
Which was just like this ridiculous G.I. Joe version of the Bureau or something, and just the things happening. It was offensive to me. I thought it was one of the worst things I'd ever watched, and I started tuning out so much by like the second episode.
Okay, hold on.
All I retained was the fucking daughters screaming in the back of the van. And then, of course, like where they end up pulling over the guys with the van with the daughters in it or something like that, and then not realizing it. And I was like, ugh.
Well, here's the thing. All right, so
it was fucking.
I'm not going to dispute
sad.
anything you said there because that was true. However, first of all, to not acknowledge that, I mean, the ticking clock. It takes place in a day. Each episode is a day. Like you weren't tense. You weren't wrung out.
So many
by the
things
end of each
have
episode.
gimmicks like that. I mean. And whether or not it's a gimmick was up to the show's producers, and maybe they did do something with it eventually. But right at that point, I mean, I've read look, Jeff, you read Savage Dragon, totally hokey comic book that's just for fun, and the whole thing with that is that it was written in real time, so to speak, so that every 30 days that would pass between issues coming out, 30 days had passed in the book, and I mean, there's been plenty of people that have played with time like that, and I think really people were attracted to the shitty melodrama, and that was their thing to latch onto and tell people like, yeah, this is actually, This is edifying experimental programming here.
Well, to
But
me,
it was
it was
really an
just
after-school
like
special.
it was just popcorn to me. I mean, it was just it was bubble gum. It was good bubble gum. I didn't
Well,
take it as anything more than just some good melodrama.
no, but
Bubblegum.
the other thing I liked about the show was, especially for the first 3 seasons, for as long as President Palmer was on it, was, I mean, you had this thing like where Jack Bauer, played by Kiefer Sutherland, gets pulled into this conspiracy that's sort of reminiscent of the Parallax View and these other conspiracy movies from the 70s, like where for the first I think it goes about almost 8 episodes, like where they're forcing him to be in a position, they're forcing him to kill Senator Palmer, who is running for president. And I mean, to me, I felt like the powerful thing about the show was that you had Jack and his family, and you had Palmer and his family. You had this Lady Macbeth schemer, sort of Lady Macbeth crossed with Richard III in Sherry Palmer. But you had these two guys, these two men. One guy who sort of works in the upper echelons in government. The other guy operates in the shadows. And as it goes on, after the first season, where now Palmer has become president, and so Jack, in a sense, Jack does work for him, and sometimes has to get orders to do some things that are troubling or risky or all those things. And you had, to me, it was just to show these men and their families and their lives against this melodramatic backdrop. I just found intriguing and riveting. I couldn't get away from it. And I feel like, in a weird way, for a number of people, I feel like 24 got people comfortable with the concept of Obama running for president. I really actually do.
Really? Oh,
I
because
do.
of President Palmer?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think that there was, I mean, the show wasn't political in the nature of the candidates. There were definitely politics in the show, and the creator of the show is fairly right wing. Definitely believes that torture works, which is funny because I feel like the same way about that show and its politics, the way not the politics, the way the show's politics and the way the creator expressed his politics, like in this long New Yorker article. The same way I feel about Spike Lee and the way he'll express his politics versus what actually turns up in the work. So what I mean by that is, this guy's like, hey, 9/11 happened, we got to get our hands dirty, torture's cool. And there were a number of people in the Bush administration who were big fans of the show. And, there is a theory that, to some way, probably small, it helped influence some of the thinking as it went on. But
Dude, you're describing the most frightening prospect that I've heard in a long fucking time.
Let me finish though. So in season 4, right, the show itself is actually much more nuanced and ambivalent about torture than what Cerno, the creator of the show, is expressing publicly. So for instance, like in season 4, basically Jack goes to work on a dude who's like the current husband, the estranged husband of this woman, the daughter of the Secretary of Defense that he's gotten with, and like, dude didn't do anything. I mean, he turns out to be innocent. Then he'd used some experimental sensory deprivation stuff on her brother. I mean, the stuff that like you see in this show is much more. It's way more ambivalent. It's nothing like down like hard line like torture is good. And that's what was funny to me is that maybe it's just sort of the artist where he's like, look, I have to, for the sake of drama, for the sake of tension, I can't just sort of be like torture is good. I've got to show all these sides. I've got to show the complexity. I've got to show Jack doing things that sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong.
Okay, on that note, I got to interrupt though to say that our producer, Zuda Granny, just explained to me that one season Bauer cuts the head off a child molester in order to infiltrate a gang.
I
So
think that was
clearly, sometimes he's doing some right and sometimes he's doing some wrong. And sometimes he's doing some, I don't know, man.
Dude, Dude, that's not even the worst of it. If this was partway through season 3, he basically like the person who has the town in this grip of terror and is basically saying, hey, they can't get to him, so they've got to do what he says. And he's like, look, you got to take out the guy from District, Chappelle. So basically the boss, the guy who oversees the division of CTU that Jack's been operating in, and they're trying like hell to get to this guy and they fail. And Jack's basically got to take him out to some abandoned graveyard and shoot this dude in the back of the head, which he does.
And this is why I like the show, because to me it was basically a comedy.
It sounds like it. I mean, is there a way to, like, if Garth Ennis was writing it, I can imagine, and it was illustrated by like Steve Dillon instead of being TV, I can imagine it maybe working because it's supposed to be just absurd, and it's wearing that on his sleeve. But I never heard anyone talk about the show in those terms. You have to see this insane comedy or this like fucking absurd show.
Well, to me, at the point where the president is the bad guy, that to me is where we were in like total comic book like fun.
Metal Gear.
I mean, because he's not just a bad guy. He's like, I mean, it was like a combination of, I don't know, like Richard Nixon and Dr. Evil or something. It was like. To me, I really, honestly, I'm not kidding. I was watching it almost like a comedy. It was like, what are they going to do this week that's like so more ridiculously over the top than last week? And if they could pull it off, I would be kind of like, bravo, that was funny.
Did you put it up there with Dr. Strangelove?
Hell no. Hell no. No, that's a masterpiece.
It's not Strangelove, and it's one of those things that you kind of have to get in the rhythm. I mean, it definitely was melodramatic. But that it had. But you said this.
You at least think. I don't know what evidence you presented, but you think that this horrible show might have influenced policy toward interrogation and handling of prisoners.
Well,
that's fucking insane.
Dude, he rolled with certain people in the administration, and there were definitely, there are points, as much as people say like Hollywood is just liberal, there are points at which, the administration had people who were interfacing with people in the entertainment community that had similar views, so. I mean, I don't have all this stuff in front of me, unfortunately. Maybe I'll dig that up for a future episode. But at the very least, sort of they felt like this was a pop culture confirmation of the rightness of what they were doing.
One thing you said earlier is I find almost more interesting is the idea that it eased the country into the idea of Obama. Because I do remember when season 1 premiered, that I thought it was really interesting and really cool that the fact that President Palmer was black was never an issue at all. It never comes up once in the dialogue that, oh, and by the way, our president is black. He just happened to be the president. That was just the actor they got to do it. And I thought at that time, of all the aspects of the show, that was actually, to me, the most interesting and the boldest, that they didn't make that be any big deal whatsoever. And so that made me wonder if...
What year was the show set in, though? Was it in the present day?
It was in the present, yeah.
I mean, why was that bold, though, instead of missed opportunity, right? I mean...
Well,
what do you mean? Because there's opportunity so much... in terms of making it be an issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to do with it, and it seems that, like, the bold thing would be to take that head on, and the challenging thing, knowing how difficult it would be, as opposed to just pretending. Because it's kind of like, when people hold up like Lara Croft or something as a positive example of, female figures in gaming. But then when you look at them, I mean, I don't want to knock, the studio because I haven't played a Tomb Raider game in so long. But at the time, when I first played them, it was like, same thing with comic books that happens. You're like, this isn't really doing anything to address the issue. It's just ignoring it by saying women are exactly the same as men. They just happen to have fake tits glued to their chest,
Right. It's just that in this case, the story they were telling didn't happen to be about race. I mean, it was about this one agent's, ordeal in this 24-hour time period. I mean, you're right.
And they didn't. So that makes sense. I mean, if the show, if it was beyond its scope as to how he was elected and getting him elected was part of the situation, and then the details of his presidency, if those aren't happening in the scope of the show, regardless, then yeah, that makes perfect sense. Then
Right. He
But
just happened to be the president.
yeah, and I think there are a couple of things that it did though that were interesting. One is I felt like it was more signifying on some of those things. So for instance, the whole thing with Jack being forced to be in a position to assassinate him, plays on the assassination of JFK, obviously, and these other, movies like Arlington Road and things like that. But also the assassination of prominent black leaders like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. Um, the other thing is, I think that was. I mean, I think you're right, Sean, that it could have been a more challenging thing to do or a more provocative thing to do. Could have been to sort of tackle race head on. But I felt the flip side of it was especially in the character of Sherry Palmer, is, having a compelling character who was devious at some points, evil at some points, but mostly devious and mostly scheming because she felt like this is what she had to do in order to guarantee her husband's election. And and to have it be a character I mean, she was able to be a character just like any other character would be in that situation. That it didn't have to be. I mean, look, sometimes the progressive thing to do is tackle race head on, and sometimes the progressive thing to do is just sort of say, like, hey, we have some really talented actors and a really compelling storyline, and we're just going to let them be that character. Like, we're not going to make it about that. And that creates some interesting moments. Like, I don't know if you remember, Jeff, the scene from season 2, like where he basically, because he's not good, there's a tough call that he needs to make, and he's basically deliberating for more time. And I think it involves military action against a country that they're being set up to believe is taking military action on them. And so basically, people in his cabinet get together and they basically depose him.
Right.
And his longtime, I think, chief of staff, or maybe it was his campaign manager from the campaign trail, who's now part of the administration with him. He basically refers to him by his, is basically, he calls him by his first name. This is when he's been deposed and he's basically in a holding area at the presidential compound. And the guy, basically says, what was his name? Is it John Palmer? David Palmer. And the guy calls him David, and he says, I'm the president, Mike. You don't call me by my first name. And to this black viewer, that was a Mr. Tibbs moment. You know what I'm saying? That was straight up Mr. Tibbs, Sidney Poitier in the heat of the night moment. And they got to have that without him having to say something, more corny like, you racist cracker. I mean,
Right.
Anyway, I don't want to oversell the virtues. I don't think I've convinced Sean here about that one. Maybe Oz, but not that one. But 24 entertained the hell out of me for 4 or 5 seasons, and then I got bored.
Fair enough.
Jeff, you're the host. I want you to keep this going.
Oh, I got to keep it going?
I'm just playing.
Have you guys been playing any games?
We have, well, I can only answer myself, actually. I've been playing games, but I mentioned them last week, and I do want to come back to them. I got a whole lot that I want to say about Killing Floor, but I want to wait until some other people here played it, so there can be a discussion. And I've been playing World at War some more. I don't know if anyone's been playing more of that.
I thought you were going to say World of Warcraft there.
Nah. Not going to happen.
Yeah,
I got my WoW to work after 6 months of being broken just last night. And now I'm faced with this terrible dilemma. Like, now that I got what I wanted, do I really want it? Because I kicked the habit. I've been able to play all sorts of other games after kicking that addiction, which it really is. And now I know I can play it again. And a part of me is just, I shouldn't do it. So it's a tough one. That game kills you for other games. So it's like kind of like a lifestyle choice you got to make if you're going to play WoW.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason. Well, there's a million reasons why I just won't touch it, but that would certainly be one of them.
Are you guys excited for the expansion?
Well, we know Sean isn't.
I hear people talk about it. It's one of those things too, I guess, if you have It's like the reverse of what we were just talking about. There's some show that people just can't stop talking about, or a comic book or an album or something, and you're just not interested in it, but you can't escape it because especially after BlizzCon, that's all I hear people talking about is Cataclysm, Cataclysm.
Yeah. Well, I missed that whole thing because I was in Germany during BlizzCon, so I'm completely out of the Cataclysm loop. Other than knowing that I could play as goblins, which I'm certainly going to do. But to me, it's just amazing that we're coming on. It's going to be, well, it's 5 years. It's going to be 6 years next year for that game, and it has so outlasted. I mean, the the expiration date on when MMOs are hot or not. It doesn't last this long. It's clearly its own. I mean, duh. At this point, this game is so in its own universe that it's almost like a separate category of gaming. You know, I don't even. I can't even imagine why any other company at this point would even bother trying to make an MMO. So, and I'm saying this as an EA employee.
And there are a number in the works still too. I mean, but we've been saying this forever. I mean, that was the whole issue. Anytime, back in the GFW days, an MMO would come up or someone would show one to us, it was like, why, pretty much. But I am seeing a lot of talk about Aeon now, but it seems like you can put an MMO and be successful for half a year and have a launch that you can put the press release out that says you've got a million people that have played, and then it just doesn't seem to save anything, right? I mean, Age of Conan was making those claims. What do you hear about that? Lord of the Rings Online, it's just very, very quiet, and they still exist. And I wonder
they
the
all
same
come along,
for
pretenders to the
Warhammer.
throne, and nobody ever takes down WoW. And how could you? That game has 11 million subscribers now. I don't see that being repeated.
But it doesn't even have to be about pretending to the throne. It's just sharing that ecosystem, and it just doesn't even seem like that can really happen.
Well, you got to convince. I mean, you either have to get new players in who just are turned off by the WoW setting, or you have to convince those WoW players who are very, very happy in that world that this other universe you're offering is as good. And I don't, so far, clearly, no one has been able to do it. Yes, each of those games has a degree of success. Lord of the Rings Online still going very strong, and I certainly don't mean to diss it or any of the other MMOs that are doing well.
Especially Warhammer. Especially Warhammer.
Right, a brilliant game from EA. But I mean, to me, really, it's just, and hopefully this is what other designers are thinking, is like, let's not compete with that game. Let's make our own thing and try to get a different.
But then that doesn't work, right? You think like Tabula Rasa, you say, let's make something sci-fi. You think Auto Assault, let's make it vehicular. And then the forthcoming one, I forget the name, that's set in space.
Right, but those games that you just cited, all those had was an aesthetic difference. They still borrowed gameplay from WoW because they were too scared to veer from.
They did, but to be fair, I mean, if you look on the design side, each of them also had a number of systems and elements that were pretty risky, and that did differentiate them to a layperson or someone who's not, super into MMOs. They weren't even noticeable. But, even things like the way that you allow people to respect characters and stuff, all these are very important. And I think I would be amazed. I mean, I say this from a point of total ignorance since I don't play WoW, but I'd be amazed if all these games, if you look at them in the aggregate, haven't basically shown, like, proof of concepted a ton of very viable alternative strategies for that genre of game. And it's just the wrong games to do it. It's eventually...
But how are you defining? How are you defining failure, Sean? I mean, is it that, I mean, because
I'm just defining by enough subscribers who are regularly paying and playing to keep your servers open. So by that, Lord of the Rings Online hasn't failed. Warhammer hasn't, as far as I know. But I mean, I think they're the exceptions, and I think there's always the fear. I would be surprised if people on those teams are absolutely confident that they're going to have their jobs, indefinitely. Again, I'm just guessing. I'm just because the frequency which I hear people talk about them, and
well, look, this might be a bad analogy, but look at the worldwide install base of PS2 compared to Xbox One and GameCube. right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to keep going. They were able to sequel, and now it's kind of inverted. I mean, I think that getting to 11 million is hard, but then when the original EverQuest got to 500,000, that was setting the world on fire. That was the standard. So it's kind of like, I think, like, look, if you're going to do the bigger challenge is what's the cost of entry to get into this space.
It's very high,
You
and the
know,
maintenance cost is just as high, and that's what makes it such a high stakes gamble, right?
Right.
well,
Instead
and
of, so
people
it's
don't.
not, and that's why it can confuse people, where they think the assumption is that you have to do comparable numbers to Blizzard in order to feel good about it, but you have to have big numbers, because all of that content, and you're constantly updating it, you're constantly introducing new stuff, has everyone down from the concept artists who are making it to the modelers and the artists to the designers, and everyone is still on the payroll. The armies of GMs that you have and people running the infrastructure, and it's just, the overhead is insane.
Yeah, I think I look. I mean, the scuttlebutt on WoW is that it was 5 years and $100 million to make, right? And if that's the cost of entry, then obviously the rewards are potentially huge when you look at how much money WoW made. But we've also seen these contenders that went up and went against WoW, and they didn't get close to those numbers. So clearly people need to have more realistic expectations. I mean, for me, I'm still finding my way in MMOs, so there's a part of me that kind of doesn't fully grasp the appeal. But the flip side is, I look at it and I say, well, if making a game is hard, and let's say making an open world game is 10 times as hard, making MMO is 100 times as hard and complex, and you have to test it in public, right? At a certain point, you can't just do a closed beta and go to launch,
Right.
right? And during that time that you're doing an open beta, you may not have all your systems in place. Some of them may be critical. Are people responding strongly, or are they not? It's so hard to get one over the finish line successfully. And now that you have one that's so dominant that it's kind of like almost like the Facebook of high-end MMOs.
That's
I
all I'm
think
saying, is that if I were running a studio and somebody was pitching me an MMO, I'd basically just say, get the fuck out of my office. I mean, you know, unless all the stakes were lower. If you came in and said you're going to compete with WoW, let me rephrase that. Then I'd say get the fuck out of my office. If you were coming in and saying that your overhead was going to be this much lower and your expectations were this much lower, and compared to the Disneyland that WoW is, you are going to have a nice little state park or city or not state park, like town fair, say, then I might be on board.
You hear that, prospective MMO pitchers? Do not visit Jeff Green. He's
And
not
having said
having it.
that, I do have to say that at Gamescom, and I know they're affiliated with EA now, but just bear with me. The BioWare Old Republic game had a really, really great demo. So that one I'm going to be watching pretty closely, especially after Star Wars Galaxies. It's going to be really interesting to see how BioWare does in this space. Because if any company has the kind of talent that Blizzard does, it's those guys. So, that's to me, that's either going to be, I hate to say WoW killer, but it's either going to be as close as we get to the kind of success of WoW, or
As close as we, meaning EA.
no, I mean we, the gaming industry. No, not EA. I mean,
Like, you shouldn't even be tempted to even use those words. Just don't say WoW killer. Period. And not even if you prefaced it with as close as possible, it's just like, at this point,
right. But since Luke's not here,
something
you can't call it
eventually
a Halo killer.
will dethrone WoW. It's just how things go, right? In the same way that, you have the ascendancy of Google over Microsoft, and and Microsoft over IBM. I mean, it's going to happen.
right. There's no
But-
there's no dethroning WoW. I think the WoW, maybe WoW is just going to run its course eventually after a number of years. I think, that's the only way that WoW goes away, is that it goes away on its own, not that something replaces it. But I do think, BioWare certainly has the design skill to come up with a super cool game that people want to play in a massive multiplayer setting. Um, and they have as good a chance as anybody, I think. And certainly they do have some pretty cool ideas, at least in theory, with what they want to do. So we'll see.
And they're certainly bringing the production values. I mean, the stuff they talked about at E3 with, like, fully voiced characters and all of those things. I mean, I shudder. Whoever is like the production managers and producers on that, I'm just like, wow, you guys got your work cut out for you. But that definitely they're not cutting corners on getting in that space. But another thing that I think even gamers don't necessarily fully realize is like how big the operation is that's behind WoW. I mean, they've got thousands of employees around the world who work on that game in various aspects. One of the most critical being customer service and all those other things. So it's just the infrastructure that it takes to compete in that space. And then, at least the Old Republic is sci-fi, though it has a number of fantasy type elements in there. I'm sort of curious about another game that is EA related, which is APB, which is coming out through EA Partners.
Get us betas for that, by the way, Jeff. Pull some strings. Yeah, I signed up for the beta, but I haven't got a response yet.
Yeah, I gotta get a beta for myself. So
I mean, I think that's the thing is that maybe part of it is that a lot of the attempted WoW killers were in a fantasy setting. And we even see this a bit to a certain extent in RPGs where, maybe sci-fi isn't quite as appealing as fantasy. Though obviously, Fallout did well, and that's kind of post-apocalyptic RPG. And I could certainly see from the experience I had playing Fallout how, a world of Fallout could be really interesting. So I just think that one thing that's going to become clearer as we start to see some more competitors come in the space, and you see the things that are happening with sort of Facebook, I don't know if you would call them MMOs or not, but Facebook-type online games and things like that, is that maybe more than anything, WoW slightly redefined but refined a number of mechanics that come out of RPGs but are sort of like a very set way. And like even when you see these games that sort of they reskin it or do things differently or add things on, they're still using a lot of the same mechanics. And maybe what needs to change is just sort of is to bring some very different mechanics to the table, and just do some things very, very differently. I don't know how soon that's going to happen, and I don't know what the prospects of that are.
Well, this is what I think along those lines about what's going to supplant World of Warcraft there is that in the same way, like I was mentioning with the whole triad of IBM, Microsoft, and Google, and whatever is the next Google, it's like that's the whole nature of it. It's something that you can't foresee, because if you could foresee it, then the people that hold the throne now would never relinquish it. And so I would be surprised as hell if it's basically a WoW clone with some iteration on its systems and rule set. It'll be that's the nature of the next big thing, right? Is that they're unknowable, but it will be odds are that it will be significantly different than the way we understand MMOs now.
World of We Play, we called it first.
World of We Play,
or World of Wii Sports, wide world of Wii Sports. There you go.
Not really.
Yeah, in terms of me and playing games, I really want to try Batman. I just got a copy sent to me today, so I'm hoping to, probably not this weekend because I've got some client work that I'm working on right now, but Monday is when I get that out of my hair, and then I'm planning to jump into a little Batman. I've been hearing, there was an interesting conversation I saw some people having on Twitter, and even if you guys haven't played it, it might be something you want to weigh in on a little bit, but it's just people were sort of, I guess there's a vision mode in the game where, enemies and clues and things are more readily apparent to Batman. Mm-hmm. And some people were, there's a whole conversation about vision modes in games and whether, just sort of the challenge, and like if the vision mode is too good, then the player stays in that mode
through the entire game. Yeah, constancy is always an issue with those things. I mean, I believe that they should be a resource that's limited, or if it's so useful, you should rethink about the entire game about making that readily available without adding some effect that diminishes the quality of what's on screen. You know, I mean, this goes back to Splinter Cell, right? I mean, if there are entire levels that are in the dark, you're playing them through night vision, and there are neat things you could do with that, right? I mean, about what's it like to actually have to spend 8 hours in night vision or something. But as far as like a whole game and interactive experience, yeah, those are always tough, and that applies to so many things, right? I mean, status effects. Like, I mean, if you were to say, yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail, but yeah, it's that would be annoying to me.
Can't wait for Batman. I'm very excited to play it. I don't have it yet. Gonna have to buy it like ordinary schlubs, and I just haven't spent the money yet. But I hear nothing but good things about it. So
I haven't heard enough to put me either way. I mean, like when I hear people saying that it's the greatest video game, I mean, comic book based video game, I mean, that always sounds like, you know, are we talking about another case of king shit on Turd Mountain? So you just don't know. And then when people are explaining that the game, some people's mind, it's a matter of the game playing itself. In others, it's about it being uber accessible. So an example of that would be the difference between when there's a wall that's glowing because you're able to destroy it and not the wall adjacent to it, versus a game where you have the tool set and you're able to produce the outcome and almost surprise yourself. You have to experiment because the outcome's not guaranteed until you actually do it. But so I heard people probably exaggerating, saying that you're walking on a ceiling or something, and then there's just the button appears to drop down and instantly kill someone. And the strengths there are pretty apparent that you can have anyone play and do that. But the downside is all the sense of creativity that you had as a player and ingenuity, where, you know, in Splinter Cell, where if you looked around at your environment and you said, I'm going to try this, although I have no idea whether this is going to result in a fail state. And then when you pull it off and you feel great, you know. I tend to not like the games that are too accessible.
Well, is it too? I guess is it accessibility is one way of describing it, and you're sort of saying you're putting accessibility on one side of an axis and expressivity on the other.
Another,
like how much can you express yourself through the game?
And there are multiple axes there, so it's never just a matter of you have maximum expressivity and minimum, like it's mutually exclusive, and minimal accessibility. I don't think that has to be the case any more than you can have total accessibility and absolute lack of expressivity. But I think it's when, like, the worst case scenario is when the game does end up that way, though.
Right. I guess part of it is just sort of also rethinking, you know, our assumptions about what it is that produces a fail state. Right. So, like, there's some in a situation like that, like if you don't have that button and you drop down into the guards, and you fail to pull off a move, then you would expect, like, well, they're going to respond to that, and, you know, it doesn't necessarily many early years earlier that would have been a fail state. The game would have stopped and you just had to retry it. Now it's more like, well, you have some time to either take them out. Maybe you can take them out before they sound an alarm. The alarm produces a fail state, or maybe the alarm just brings in more people and it's just escalating the response that you have to deal with. So I think there's already been a fair amount of progression in how developers have been able to deal with these things, and some of that is just technical, right? That, you know, there's more memory now and things like that, so they can support a richer set of circumstances and responses, so the game responds to what you're able to do or not able to do. But I mean, I hear your complaint.
There's different, like the thing with the wall, for example. What that allows you is, if you say, well, we're just going to tag this wall as destructible, and we're going to notify the player in advance that it's destructible. And I'm not talking about Batman here. Let's just talk about in general. You know, the nice thing there is that you just have to make one destructible wall. You don't have to. You're not getting yourself into a Red Faction situation where you need to make an entire game that supports this. What do you do? What happens, where you have a billion edge cases? What happens when this wall collapses and it lands on top of the key that you need to open the door? What happens when it kills the NPC that you need to talk to in order to get your next mission? So you avoid all that kind of stuff. And the neat thing is and you can look at it one way and say we still get to have the destructibility. That's the compromise we're making. But the key then becomes like, do you make it like the rock wall in Zelda where it's tagged with a crack in it, and people end up recognizing that for what it is, but they stop seeing it as this is essentially a script that I'm playing stuntman or something here. I'm playing as a stuntman, and I need to perform according to the directions I'm being given. And that's just where it's challenging because there's no single way, even though people continue and they'll always continue to experiment with that kind of thing. I don't think there's any perfect system in place yet for that.
Well, what did you guys think of about the news about the easy automatic mode in Bayonetta? You guys hear about this?
It was funny for a joke. Yeah, I posted the video and said this is what PC players mean when they use the word contarded. And it's essentially you can play the entire game and you just press a single button. And then the other jokes were because Bayonetta's got the sexy heroine that you can use your other hand to jack your pud. But I don't think looking at it, you're like, yeah, it's kind of neat. But I think they erred. Yeah, they are emblematic of having total accessibility and zero expressivity because it's just, why aren't you watching a video at that point, right? I mean, does anyone? It almost seems condescending to think that anyone would want to sit there and press that button just to watch the events unfold. Like, couldn't you save a lot of energy by putting a DVD in and pressing a single button once to let it go? I mean, it's no longer a game at that point.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think that, again, to use a stereotypical example, because I'm sure, some people's moms, maybe your own mothers, are excellent game players, but mine is not.
Does she want to play Bayonetta, though? Do you think it's just that she would have such a hard time dealing with the interface that if she was given the option to sit there and press a button for 8 to 13 hours that she would take that?
That's a good question. I don't think she wants to play Bayonetta. But I think if
and
I
what the hell he's talking about?
I'm like, look.
Right.
Part of what I find interesting about games is that, once you've got these systems built, and I don't know how many, I'm sure it was not an inconsequential amount of time or resources that went into making easy automatic mode. At the same time, because the medium is so fungible, you can produce different types of accessibility to different people on top of largely the same code. And so I think that, if you look at your own homes, Jeff, since you're married, right? There's you, your wife, and your daughter. That's it?
Yep.
And, there's probably varying degrees of gameplay skill and like that kind of stuff and interest as well. But with something like this, if your wife or your daughter walks by and sort of sees that and it's like, that looks like fun, there's a mode like where you can hand over the controller and sort of say, depending on what the skill level is, if there's 0 skill, and sort of say, look, do this. Tap the A button. Win. Have fun. Entertain yourself.
I think most people, though, would just sense that, maybe there's a sweet spot that's just a few steps above that where you can at least control the direction your character's moving in. But when you feel, this is the whole nature of why games are satisfying, right? Is that you feel as though you are determining the outcomes. And when you don't feel as though you're determining the outcome and you start to feel like a pigeon in a Skinner box where they're fucking with you, where there's essentially a button there, but it's not actually producing the food. It's just that's randomized. People are smart enough to get a sense for that, and I don't know what reason they would want to continue. I just don't think they would enjoy themselves. This is just a guess here. We'd have to put a whole bunch of focus group of people in front of it and say, hey, is this fun?
Yeah.
But my hypothesis is that it's not.
I think, again, that different people want different things out of games, and even at different times. So if you look at the description here in the 1UP story, it says where's this thing? According to Kamiya, the very easy automatic mode is capable of putting the main character in perfect position to attack while triggering various combos. Dodging is a matter of hitting the punch button. It's possible to weave in your own moves at any point, which means that you can enjoy a battle packed with originality. Okay, that sounds like kind of contradictory. I don't know if they mean you can sort of turn it off and turn it on at any time. And then here's what he says is interesting. You can consider automatic mode to be a helping hand from an incredibly skilled expert in the game, Kamiya wrote. Not only that, health is not an issue and very easy since vitality will be recovered in a few short moments after taking damage. So they mess with health. They do warps, I believe, to move the character from point to point, so you don't have to deal with movement. And then in terms of pulling off, cool combos, you can do those with a single button. So each of those are, and I'm sure there are more. There are 3 axes that they've called out here, along which they can simplify the game for you and make it easier to sort of get to the stuff that's really cool. So a really simple input, I should say, produces a really complex output. I'm like, well, what's wrong with that? You don't have to do it.
Right. Right, of course. You don't have to do it. I guess it's just, right. I mean,
his description is confusing to me, I think, too, because when you watch the video has a camera, it's split screen and shows you what's happening on the television. It shows you what's happening with the interface. And she's literally pressing a single button with no discernible pattern involved, just other than just as fast as she can. And that's different. A simple input with a complex output, it can be a sweet thing, right? Like in Grand Theft Auto, jacking a car now, you press a button, it interprets your intentionality, and it opens the door, rips the person out who is in the vehicle, puts you in place, closes the door, and puts you on your way. But the reason it works in GTA is because, you don't want to have 10 different buttons and 10 different inputs for opening the door, because that's not necessarily where the fun is at. But in a game like Bayonetta, where I think every punch or kick that you throw and every backflip you do and juke that you pull off, those are all important. And the assumption for the normal mode is that they're fun to perform. And that's why they are left in player control. But to take all of that away, like you're saying, and there's so many different, levers that you can pull and dials that you can turn to scale back the complexity of something. But where do you reach the point where you've basically removed all the gameplay? And this isn't, I sound like I'm being defensive, because the rule is, for me, it really is to speak no evil of another studio. But in Bayonetta's case, very plainly, it's not detracting from the game in any way, shape, or form to make this mode available to those that choose to try it out. But we're talking about it as far as it's as an experiment, To my knowledge, no one's done something that's as rudimentary, that's as reductive to the gameplay as this, for a game that can be as complex as it is in its normal mode.
And now that I'm looking at the actual post on Platinum Games website, so what they are saying was right, is that at any time, he says, at any time when you're in automatic mode, you can still dodge and move under your own control if you so choose. So it sounds like if you're giving movement inputs, the game will allow those. If you stop, then it'll start moving for you at any time. They claim that you can turn this mode on and off anywhere in the game, which is interesting, because this goes to something I've talked about before, is what happens when I hit a point in the game that, maybe I am weak sauce and that's why I can't get past it, but maybe the AI is borked, or maybe it's just sort of, maybe it's the designer's fault actually at a certain point. And then in the case of games that let me drop down in difficulty, should I be forced to play the entire game at this lower difficulty because because I couldn't get past that one part? Well, now you're starting to see some games that allow you to change the difficulty at any time. Games like this one, where if that's what they're saying is right, you can turn on easy automatic on or off at any time, that kind of stuff. And I think sometimes you want to beat your head up against a challenge Braid style for a really long time, and other times you're kind of like, I kind of do want to get to, I've tried this 6 or 7 times, I just want to get past it so I can get on to the next thing.
I totally agree there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. I'll go
say it's a very fundamental kind of design decision, and I on my team now, we're working on our next game, and that question has come up immediately in terms of some of the the games we're designing, some of the mini games that players are going to be doing, and again, it's set to a slightly younger age group, um, 8 to 12 ish. But the design question doesn't change. It's that we're faced with the idea, and it came up in the game we just finished, My Sims Agents. In that game, we don't have any kind of cheat or skeleton key or whatever. If they can't finish that particular puzzle, they're kind of screwed. So going into the new game, we thought, well, should we change that? I mean, hopefully we design the puzzles so that that won't happen, that they're challenging enough but not impossible. You can never really tell that. All you could do is focus group it to death and hope you've hit some kind of sweet spot. But what we're talking about in the new game, or debating, I should say, is this notion of a skeleton key. Like, should the game monitor, well, you did this thing like 10 times and you seem to be going nowhere, so press this button and we'll solve it for you. Or maybe you have to spend some certain kind of currency, either points or money or whatever in the game, and we'll only give you so many to get past this one part. It's a really tough thing because there's definitely people on the design side who are just like, no, we're not going to do this at all because they need to solve. We don't want people to exploit it, nor do we want to feel like they should have to do that. That if they have to do that, then maybe we designed the puzzles wrong. So I think it's an ongoing challenge for designers.
Right. It's kind of hard because you do want to think. I think that designers would want to think that they've done everything on their part, and if someone is still running, into trouble, they're just stupid. Which is kind of
right.
been, at times it sounded like that was Itagaki's point of view. And then even going so far as to when he begrudgingly includes an easier difficulty mode to call it Ninja Dog, to make it clear to the person who's playing it that they're inferior, and
right.
And so on and so forth. But I think what Ngai is saying, giving people the option, the worst case scenario I think you could ever run into is that someone who's gone so far as to buy your game, they've expressed a desire to play it and they've been enjoying it, and for them to just stop all of a sudden because they literally can't make any progress.
Right.
That's horrible, and you never want that to happen. That's why I always thought it was very cool in BioShock, despite the controversy that the Vita Chambers produced, but also that you could change the difficulty, like Ngai is saying, at any time you wanted, and then you weren't committed to that. So if you were running into trouble in a certain room against a certain Big Daddy or something, you could turn it to easy, and as soon as you killed him, you could turn it right back up to hard or wherever you were before.
Mm-hmm. That's what I did.
No one's forcing you to do that. It's there. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of the people that we call hardcore, just core audience, that's upsetting to them to even know that that's there, that that's a possibility. Because it's
that's sort of like the age-old save everywhere argument too, right?
Right. Yeah, but it is good. I like to see even more, like, Silent Hill for a while now has individually let people change the difficulty of the puzzles and then of the combat and the fighting and stuff, which I think is perfect because it's, again, maybe if you're just having trouble with the puzzle, but you love fighting the monsters, you're not going to want to suddenly kill them all with a single swipe of your pipe just because you wanted to do the tile puzzle. So, I mean, that's smart too. And I think the more options, the better. But then, of course, you can run into the danger there is that you can run into option fatigue, where someone like if you look at IL2 Sturmovik has maybe 2 meta pages worth of clickable, selectable options, and it's overwhelming to some people. It's like, what do you do? And then, of course, the solution there is that before you even expose people to that, you make that optional. Do you want to play this in arcade mode? Or do you want to, are you experienced enough now that you want to start to try to increase your difficulty? And then you can start to look at these and then...
Well, one of the things that I think you're right about those just people getting creative about how to deal with it. And I understand the temptation of designers, and I think the problem that Jeff is expressing there is absolutely right. It's like, well, maybe there are things that the team, with a particular puzzle should do to sort of make that more solvable by a wider range of people rather than do those other things. But I think the challenge is that you're designing, it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears and the porridge, right? It's like, how do you
Yeah.
know? You can't design your game. Individual people are going to buy your game, but you can't design it for each individual person.
Right.
Right.
It's
You have to do these
impossible.
things that are gonna tackle large swaths of people, and hopefully it'll work. And I think having different, because obviously difficulty is tied to progression. If you hit a place where you can't, it's too hard for you for whatever reason, whether it's your fault or the designer's fault, and you can't get past, well, that is you might have a negative experience because of that. Some people will go online and find the FAQ and the other things. Other people will just get frustrated and turn off the game. And I think, one approach I've seen that I've liked is what, it's probably not the only one, but the EA is doing with the new Need for Speed, where everything you do in the game gives you points, right? If you're an aggressive driver, if you're a careful driver, there are all these things giving you points, and you can use those points to advance through the various events. You don't have to come first, second, or third. Now compare that to MotorStorm. MotorStorm's like a fabulous looking game. The physics are great, all that stuff, but you pretty much have to finish first, second, or third in a race in order to advance, and that's kind of hard.
It's
So
very
it's
old
like,
school.
so that those are the things that I sort of think about, both for myself and for some of my clients. Where
I
that's
got
an issue.
anyone get that with Street Fighter 4 is like, I just wanted to unlock characters, so I did the traditional thing. You turn the time limit down to minimum, you make it a 1-round battle, and you turn it to the easiest mode, and you hope to just play through the game with multiple characters. But then for whatever reason, when you get to the end boss, he is just a fucking nightmare, and he's insanely difficult to beat, and it just becomes insanely frustrating. And then you go and you look, and of course, if you go onto a forum, and if you go and seek help on a public forum like that, you're just exposing yourself to the usual bunch of idiots who are like, oh, because you fucking suck, learn to fight the boss.
Right.
And that's the problem, is like, I don't want to learn to fight the boss because I want to play this with friends. I don't want to fight the boss. I don't even want to play it single player, but I want to have access to these other characters when I play multiplayer. And here I am, and that's another issue, I acknowledge, when you make people play single player in order to obtain benefits that are applicable to multiplayer. But it's like, no, I don't want to hear any of your shit. I don't care. I suck at fighting this boss. That's true. I honestly, just give me some code to unlock these characters. And instead, what happened is like that. I realized, my usual thing in my fight for hard drive space when I'm downloading new games on Steam, that Street Fighter 4 was one that I removed recently because for that reason.
Yeah, that's brutal. That's just brutal.
Well, Jeff, bring us home, man. Bring us home.
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing on that. Just that I know we have to go soon, but you just were reminding me of when I was talking to the Blizzard developers, and back when they first started. If you don't follow WoW, a lot of the ongoing patching process and changes they've been making over the years is they've been making a lot of the game progressively easier, especially in the end game content. And it's extremely controversial to hardcore players, obviously. But when you talk to the developers, they had like one fundamental thing that they would say, which is that, listen, we spent hundreds of hours making this content, and we want players to see it.
Exactly.
And that was the problem. Was like they made these things like challenging and very difficult, and those like uber elite players who did it first and all that got bragging rights. But then the bottom line was the majority of the player base wasn't even ever getting there. Mm-hmm. So, it's the reason that they lowered the number of people required to do raids and dungeons, because it's hard to get 40 people together, So let's rescale these things so that 10 people could do it instead, that kind of thing. Strictly because they want people to actually play their game that they made. Yeah,
and it sounds too like I've heard, like, when I hear people talking about it, it sounds like a whole lot of streamlining is going on, where originally they would have a number of independent systems that would manage your stats and your ability to cast spells and to fight and stuff, and they're just realizing that it doesn't need to have as many moving parts as it does, that you can get the same results with fewer moving parts. And that's just a whole nother thing for the industry to be going in, over and over again. When Team Fortress 2 came out, this was, Robin Walker speaking for Valve's team that produced that game, saying it's the same thing. How simple can we get it and still allow the maximum degree of variety and expressivity?
Yeah. Well, that's why I instantly fell in love with Battlefield 1943, just being a veteran of the original Battlefield series and then tuning out for years, was
Perfect example.
coming it back to it on Xbox Live and just turning on the Xbox and basically pressing my console button like twice and I'm in a server was brilliant. I mean,
And not
and
only that, but the class system as well, right? The way
yep,
that they stripped that down, and they basically took 5 or 6 classes and
yep.
compressed them into the 3 that you have now, and just rethought the role that they would play, and it
But
makes
as
more
Without
guys
sense.
really
who,
taking, yeah,
what I was going to say is, as guys who've carried the banner as journalists for the PC for so long, what do you think the response would be when the PC version finally ships? I think it's going to be either early next year now, or either later this
I
year, or early
No,
next
it's
year.
supposed to be in
thought it,
September, and I'm counting the
I
Oh,
days
thought it
September.
was,
because
yeah, I thought it was soon, yeah.
it's split our gameplay group up, because some of us have been just fine enjoying it on the 360, and then a few others of us just refuse to touch it on there. So I
Well,
can't
that's a
wait for it to
great
come out.
question, and Guy, I guess it remains to be seen, right? I mean,
Yeah, like
I have no clue.
having it that stripped down on PC. How do you think people would respond?
I think they'll be fine because the stripping is very intelligent, right? As long as they don't make the planes quite as cuntarded as they are on the console,
Hmm.
meaning, on the PC, the planes were so rewarding because, there was always a danger of going into a stall, but it was still arcadey, right? It wasn't a sim, it was 9L2. But the stuff about not having a class that's basically dedicated to maintaining tanks and laying mines, no one's going to complain about that. I think they'll see.
Right.
And they changed because people sort of proactively, because people started to complain as soon as they heard that there was regenerating health and regenerating ammunition. DICE said, okay, we're going to tune the PC one differently, just to sort of address the market that N guy is talking about. But what I think it sucks is that as a lifelong, Battlefield player, those things are absolutely fine, and it's great having those in the console version. So I'll be surprised. The stuff that's missing, right, in some of these same maps, Iwo Jima and stuff, in the original version, there were submarines that no one used and didn't do anything with.
Yeah.
There's battleships that basically, it was the artillery, it was the bombers, but you would just be stuck in it. And instead of walking into a bunker in one contestable piece of territory, you'd sit in this thing and over again shell the entire game. And I mean, everything they've done, I think, has been smart, just addressing issues and bloated, baggage elements from the original game.
Well, and what that gets into is that so going back to what Jeff was saying about WoW and how WoW has evolved is encouraging developers to think longitudinally about their game, right? Because maybe with WoW, maybe the way the game was in the beginning, without having been streamlined, is what those more avid gamers, the early adopters, would want. But then for your trailing people, you sort of make it a little bit easier. You reduce the numbers of people needed and that kind of thing. Because when you look at 11 million people, the player base for WoW has got to be fairly diverse. And so I'm wondering, is there a thing like where they start to have enough data that they can look at and mine and sort of say, it's like, look, here are some general design principles for quests and raids early on in the life cycle, but then maybe like 9 months out, here are things we can do to it to sort of make it accessible, to sort of bring the next people up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons for the success. I mean, they data mine the shit out of that game, constantly. They know how many people are within whatever dungeon at what times of day and how long they're spending in there. I mean, they're watching that stuff, and that's where all the tuning is coming from. I mean, part of the streamlining you're talking about is like they keep lowering the minimum level you need to get a mount because they feel like, yeah, when the game first launched in 2004, getting a mount was a big deal, something we all had to work towards. It took forever, and now they feel like, well, the bulk of the player base is already way past that anyway, and we want new players to get further along and join them towards the end. So we don't need to make them suffer for 40 levels to give them a mount. Let's just give it to them at 20, because who cares anymore? So that's where a lot of it is going towards, like just lowering the barrier to entry
for those who want to get on board.
And that's what's nice about having, one of the things that's nice when you have franchises that are that successful and that long running, because from what you guys are saying, it sounds like DICE has been able to take a lot of the learning that they got from the original Battlefield and probably some from successive ones, both on PC and on console, to figure out, well, how can we streamline this experience to, you sort of figure out where the real fun is and focus on that.
And that's the good thing, the importance of sequels for games.
Yes.
And what makes them different from movies is just that what you're saying is that because, for all the reasons that we've brought up so far, that you're designing a game for however many people you sell it to, and each one of those people's different. Having the opportunity for people to sit there and play the thing, and then not just to, in a beta, but then, to make another version, which is what DICE has been able to do, much like, Blizzard with World of Warcraft. And they can see how, hey, on paper, they thought people were going to interact a certain way. It turns out that very few of them ever did. So it's time to go back to the drawing board and fix that up.
Right. Well, there's a long, glorious history in gaming of the sequel being better than the original, right? I mean, probably more so in this field of entertainment than maybe in any other, because we do find out what we did wrong, or and what people were actually doing. I mean, there's example after example.
And in that way is where we are like consumer devices, because where they improve in usability is because ultimately it's something that has to be used by people.
Right. But what you're describing from what Blizzard has done, if you extrapolate that wider, I mean, so clearly Valve could do something like that with, probably as far back as the original Half-Life, because, they would have access to that code base through Steam. And if you think about it, even on, now that you can patch console games and things like that, imagine a, Rockstar selling a GTA 4 collection, so whatever, let's say they do 2 more games just like they did Vice City and San Andreas, and that 5 years from now they release the collection for download, and they've made certain things easier and certain things more accessible and that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously these are packaged goods games, so we don't think about them the same way that we think about MMOs, but now that the boxes are designed to be connected, now that they can be patched, now they have hard drives, I mean, our developer is going to kind of end up being like Ridley Scott with Blade Runner, or Lucas with the Star Wars movies, that they're sort of never done.
Profitability, I think, would be the key thing there.
Right, and also, I mean, obviously, patching has been going on for a long, long time, right? And often patches are made for exactly that reason, to change gameplay balance. I mean, I'm talking about single-player games where they just realize they fucked up.
I had someone insist to me that Killzone should be replayed following the patches. Didn't get a ton of detail. Basically said a number of issues that people had with the game control-wise were addressed in the patch.
Killzone 2?
Well,
Killzone 2.
Huh.
The Witcher is a great example of a game that got better on the re-release. When they had the chance to fix a bunch of shit that was broken. So,
but as for specifically, like, say, if Rockstar was going to take GTA 3 and go and not remake it, but retune it, maybe make some adjustments to spawners and that kind of thing. I mean, that's to justify that work, you would either have to it would have to be a true labor of love, where you're just, one of the Housers is like, we absolutely adore this game and we want it to people to play it forever, instead of us, putting all this energy and money into the next thing we make. Or you'd have to know that people were going to buy it in substantial numbers to justify it, because, again, at the end of the day, these things cost money.
Yep.
So true, boys. So true.
All right. I think we're at the end of the line here. We never did see Ashley.
We got a message from him halfway through saying he overslept, so we know what happened. It's just the usual. We'll see if he passes out during PAX. That'll be interesting. If he falls asleep.
I mean, he might spark right. Like, he might spark up right there.
Wake him up, yeah. Just tell him there's a UFO outside. What?
Alrighty. So once again, nice chatting with you fellas, and hope everybody enjoyed the show. And we will be back, I suppose, after PAX. Is that correct?
Absolutely, but you should at least. I mean, guys, go ahead and plug yourselves for PAX. Where can people find you at the show to sort of to see the Brodeo reunion, the band getting back together, Page and Plant on stage? Where can they see it?
It's bad that it's Jeff and I on here because neither of us
Yeah,
know.
good question. Oh, I'm gonna know in a second. I'm gonna stall you
Take a look.
very, very slowly. It's happening on Saturday, September. What day is that? It's this coming
5th?
Saturday, September 5th at 8:30 p.m. Yes, at 8:30 p.m. at the Raven Theater at PAX. 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. If you choose to go to our panel, I have to warn you, you're going to miss out on the happening at the same time as the American Griffball League of America is also happening 8:30 to 9:30.
What is that?
I don't know what the fuck Griffball is, but anyway.
Are any of the other podcast guys like right before or after us?
Yeah, actually, I believe so. The Giant Bomb reunion tour is happening 7 to 8. So you Giant Bombcast fans,
That's cool.
and I'm one of them. You can listen to them or watch them at the Serpent Theater 7 to 8. I'll go ahead and plug them. What the hell? 7 to 8. Then you get a half-hour break, and you could come to the Brodeo reunion after us.
It's
So
cool. Double up.
a whole Saturday evening of infotainment fun there for you.
How do you feel, Jeff? You're used to this kind of thing now. You've been pitching your game for a while.
So how do I feel about what?
About about Shreelan and dealing.
Wheeling and dealing my game again at PAX?
No, I just mean in general, pimping anything.
Oh, yeah, whatever. I'm okay with the pimping. It's fine. You know, they pay me. Yeah, I am going to be pimping my game, my Sims agents at the EA booth, and thankfully for the last time, I think. And I don't mean that as any reflection on the game, but just it's hard work. But the game is actually shipping,
it's hard out there for a pimp.
It is very hard out there for a pimp, yes, or maybe a hoe. I don't know which I am. Either way, it's hard doing the same demo over and over. So after this one, I could just say, go buy the fucking game already. Don't make.
Well,
me
my
demo
guess
it
is
anymore.
that you're a pimp before the game is released and a hoe afterwards.
That could be, or maybe a hoe during the production and a pimp now.
That good point. Good point.
I don't know.
Jeff,
whatever.
take us out. The final word
Yeah,
from you.
we're out.
I'm going to direct
We're
you.
done.
It's going to be, it ain't easy being sleazy.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Love ya. Kisses.